I'll tell you what, one of the best examples of me making gains was when I started deadlifting consistently. I went from like deadlifting in the gym, maybe it was in the summer. So this was about a year to a year and a half of deadlifting to go from almost no consistent experience to about 405 on the deadlift. And for most of that time, I didn't control the eccentric hardly at all. And I certainly didn't do any like I never did rack pulls, so I never did any partials. So despite not doing any isometrics, a whole lot of eccentrics or any partials, I got some of the best gains on any exercise I've ever done just by doing pretty much concentric only. So it depends. You know, yeah. I think you can get a lot with just eccentric. I think partials are helpful, but they're not uniquely helpful compared to some other means of working harder by comparison.
Yeah, I think it's just because I'm a big fan of work density compared to not saying you should be doing HIT Mike Menzer style. That's total bullshit. But for me, if you watch my video, like I made a video talking about like how I have my basis of logic to build my program. For me, you should be like in an effort window that is high enough for you to induce hypertrophy and to have quality sets. Because for me, it doesn't really make sense to prolong your workouts more than they need to. For me, it should be something that you're forced to have long workouts, not that you want long workouts and therefore you adapt the rest of your program to having long workouts, because that's a mistake I made. So for me, work density takes priority. So if let's say you have like 3 sets of lateral raises, right? And you're doing the partials, you're going beyond failure, and maybe you have like a pause at the top, maybe you're done with those 3 sets. But let's say you stop at your strict reps, right? And you're like this, and you fail, and then like stop. You probably have to do maybe double that, maybe like even I don't want to say triple, but maybe you have to do like 7, 8 sets compared to just 3. So yeah, I think that having like a lot like doing partials is not necessary, but it helps condense the work and it helps you save time. Also, you don't have to take it to the extreme. I'm not saying that you should be again doing just 1 set and you try to push it as beyond failure as you can, because that's just dumb. I think that the HIT crew is mistaken in thinking that you can keep pushing failure and failure and failure without adding sets, because intensity is capped. It's capped at 100%. If you employ some strategy to go beyond failure, you're just going at 100% more and more and more. So you're basically doing sets, but you're missing out on the non-effective reps that also add to the tonnage, and you're getting
Well,
a shit ton more.
I would play devil's advocate for the high intensity crew because they still have. Yes, I my critique of them is also like you said they've taken certain variables and made them fixed, which again in my lecture on variables I said, you know, by definition variables are a thing that's not fixed. So it's like it's always silly to be like this is the variable, this is the variable, you know, put a number to it and say that's the hard number. But they still have reps and weight. So if you do high intensity style and you're as frequently as your progression is allowing you, adding an extra rep, you know, you went to 12 to failure plus whatever you did beyond failure. Now you can try and do 13 next week, right? Like that's still progression, or you can eventually try more loads. So while they have, yes, they've minimized their volume and frequency to the point where it's fixed on paper, and that might be a detriment in the long run. If they're seeing progress from it, they still at the very least have reps and weight as variables which can change as their means of progression. Not that I'd recommend high intensity training, but if I had to play devil's advocate, I'd say at least they have that.
Yeah. That's I agree in that regard. But again, for me at least, it makes sense to have a high work density, like I said. But again, you shouldn't go overboard with it, like this kind of guy. I think that
they're the extreme example. They definitely
balancing. You should be balancing the variables in such a way that allow you to maximize tonnage. For some people, most people might be having the intensity between 6 to 0 reps in reserve, and sometimes going beyond failure. Volume 10 to 20 is usually the range that is recommended, and I think it applies to most people. And then having a frequency of 2 times a week, that's usually the general standards. And they are there because they are the standards that allow you to maximize tonnage. But for some people, it may be better to have more intensity, or for some people, it may be better to have more volume, or for some people, it may be better to have less or more frequency depends on each person. So having a variable being fixed for everybody, I think it's bad because it tries to be a universal rule when it's actually not true. You know, universal rules don't apply.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen people that does HIIT training, and I'm honestly not quite sure what it is HIIT, what it implies, what makes a program HIIT and what it doesn't. But from what I've seen, a guy I had a discussion with on Instagram saying that HIIT was the best and he got his best gains doing HIIT. In my opinion, it wasn't HIIT what he was doing. I mean, yeah, maybe in paper it was, but he was doing high volume. Because he did one set for exercise, but he was doing 5 to 6 different exercise per muscle, but just different. Like one set to failure on bench, then one set to failure on dumbbell, then one set to failure on machine. But like, dude, it's a hit, really. I mean,
that's part of the problem, and Sam brought that up in part 2 of our thing. Is like you have people advocating HIIT who don't know what it means, or they'll use even Dorian Yates as an example, and Dorian Yates was doing probably at least double the work that Mike Mentzer would recommend. So that's a big problem with the discussion with HIIT. It's like we're not talking about the same thing. We're just yelling over each other, you know. And I agree.
Yeah.
I was doing like that's a lot of work, and good for him for doing that. No wonder he got good gains. Yeah.
So yeah, they get very dogmatic about it, but when I see what they're doing, it's like I'm not sure you know what HIIT means. So
Yeah.
you're exactly doing HIIT.
I do HIIT, bro. It's so controversial. You wouldn't believe it. Does 6 sets of muscle group twice a week. Has the most vanilla program ever, you know? So yeah, pretty funny thing. But yeah, that's the whole thing about like intensity and stuff like that. Yeah, I think it is usually very underrated, but at the same time, it's very overrated by some people. The same with volume, right? A lot of people, like you have the exact same guys that overrate intensity, bashing volume, and you have the guys that underrate, that bash on intensity, overrating volume. I think we should find the volume that works for each of us, because if you see Jeff, right, everyone says that Jeff does high volume, right? And even himself says, I do high volume. Now, I think that something that it's missing on the fitness sphere right now is basically pointing out that for an individual, what you may consider high volume for that person may be regular volume, right? Because again, universal laws don't apply to lifting for each individual, right? So what I have noticed is that what may be again high volume or high intensity for me may be like low volume and medium intensity for you. So it's a very ever-changing thing. That's why when I make my videos about like talking, for example, about lifting or programming and stuff like that, I always try to put it into the perspective first of experimentation, trying it out for yourself and seeing what works and what doesn't. And the second thing being like nothing is fixed. It's not that every single person can only do 10 to 20 sets per muscle group. Some people may actually have the range of like 6 to 8 or 3 to 10, right, of sets per week. And some other guys may have like a volume range per week of like 30 to 40, like I have for my back, or like Croissant has for his presses, right? So it's a never changing thing, at least for me.